What's everybody? Welcome to the Grand
All
Torino.
right.
I have another
Thank you.
exciting guest here, Simon. Simon Roche here from the Sudaland in South Africa. Simon, how are you?
Well, thank you. And yourself, Robin?
I'm brilliant. Thanks very much for joining us this evening. Want to talk to everybody today about what's going on in South Africa, and want to get first-hand account from yourself about the expropriation, the land expropriation, Julius Malema, Cyril Ramaphosa. And any other information that you can have, that you can share with my Irish audience, my American audience. You know, we're still very involved with the American stuff going on with President Trump and the huge machinations, but trying to keep our eye away from that. We want to talk to you about South Africa because it's not getting covered in the media. The farm orders are basically just being blatantly ignored. They're a huge phenomenon over there, and you guys are under severe pressure over there. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. As many of your viewers will know, South Africa became a multiracial democracy when the ANC of Nelson Mandela fame won the first multiracial elections in 1994. And since then, there's been a sort of gradual decline in almost every aspect and facet of our state. And initially, people were quite forgiving about it because, perhaps it was teething pains, perhaps, it was to be expected, and the ANC was taking a while to learn how to govern well and what have you. But almost a quarter of a century later, we find ourselves in a situation where things are getting worse and worse and worse at an accelerated rate. It's not slowing down, it's not stopping, it's not reversing, it's accelerating. And so now we're in a situation where we have this massive rate of murder across the country, and then a massive rate of murder of white farmers, the decline in our currency, the junk rating of our sovereign bonds, unemployment rate that has reached something like 50%, and so on and so forth ad infinitum. It's just kind of becoming steadily more chaotic in the country.
They're they're not managing the economy at all, and the corruption is rife. It's very much a case that they're feathering their own nests, taking whatever monies they can, and the country seems to be falling to rack to ruin. I noticed today that the rand is plummeting, and South Africa is practically in recession now. I also think we are. You also have the Chinese movement.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Simon. Sorry. Bit of a delay.
I beg your pardon. Sorry, Robin. I just wanted to say technically we're in a recession. And our leading economist recently revealed in a video that in fact we've been in a recession for 5 years if you take certain factors into account. That's severe. 5 years of recession.
Yeah, and the day-to-day, like even just getting about, I've seen many articles, and I'm part of different groups and different apps and first-hand accounts of random robberies and shootings and killings and murders. You see attacks on people's dwellings. As soon as the gates open, people enter to go into their houses. The cars are pulling up behind, and the assailants are practically dragging people out of their cars, not only to steal the cars, but practical kidnappings and everything.
Yeah, that's right. Vehicle hijacking is a massive thing in South Africa. It's an industry unto itself, and the perpetrators tend to be very callous. So people get injured or killed in the vehicle hijackings. It's always a concern when you have a mother, a sister, a daughter, a wife, or girlfriend traveling alone in a vehicle at night. And now it's become customary for white women, particularly, just not to stop at stop streets or traffic lights at night.
Yeah, I can't even begin to imagine, just the day-to-day trying to just go about your normal business without fear of kidnap, murder, or you're going to see your loved ones again at any hour of the day. Can you speak to us about the pressures like that, the pressures on family, the pressures on just as your day-to-day? I know the Sudalands are arming. I know you're expecting a full-on civil war. How far and how bad do you think it's going to actually get?
Well, Saatlanders is a organization devoted solely to preparing for a civil war under international law. There are certain laws, particularly in the protocols additional to the Geneva Conventions, which provide particularly for identifiable ethnic groups that feel threatened to prepare for civil war within certain parameters. No cruise missiles and nuclear submarines, nothing like that at all. And so that's really our only focus. But as we spread the message to people, we have to give supporting evidence for why we believe there's going to be a civil war. And so we talk about the farm murders and various other things. They have very little to do with us, or nothing to do with us as an organization. But if you talk about the pressure that people feel, you know, we had some journalists from Russia today out here, came to meet us and spend some time with us. And I was chatting to the one guy about an incident in which my skull was crushed. And he was absolutely incredulous. He couldn't believe that I was telling the truth, you know, until I, you know, really showed, you know, because there's still damage to the skull. And I was chopped with an axe here. One of my sons was mugged at the age of 12. His mom has had her home completely burgled twice. She's been in a number of smash and grab incidents. My father was made to kneel and attempted to assassinate him, but the gun misfired twice. So all of these things, when you ask about pressure, form a kind of a framework for how people live and how they think and what they feel. And that's causing a gradual increase in tension right across the country, particularly amongst white people, because the majority of the not the majority in absolute terms, but in proportional terms, the majority of the crime is directed at white people. You know, it's highly disproportionate to the number of white people. We're only about 1 in 12 people in South Africa, about 8.5%. But the crimes perpetrated against whites are fantastically high. So people are afraid, they're concerned, they're fearful. And it seems now as if this thing is not letting up, it's only getting worse. I wrote something down here for another interview. I'll just look away from the camera for a second. Another interview earlier today, and I'll just quickly tell it to you.
Go ahead,
yesterday,
sir.
on Tuesday, the 18th of September, farmers in Free State province of our country reported that 88,850 acres of farmland had been burned in a series of recent attacks on farms only in that province. So this is a new phase of this kind of revolutionary thing where they're burning down farms. And as I said, 88,000 acres, or about 35,540 hectares. All of this stuff taken together is enough to give you real cause for concern, unless you're living in a big city and you've got lots of money and you're insulated from the realities of the social fabric in the rest of South Africa. You know, if you're working in a tall glass building, earning big bucks, and you're driving in a car, you know, with great locking systems and what have you, home to your suburban home that's got a giant wall and an electric fence around it and that kind of stuff, then you don't feel it. But for many other people, it's a practical reality.
Yeah, we kind of get that in different stages. In Ireland here, we're very much at the early incubating stage, where our immigration is going through the roof, and our middle class are protected. They're in their own little communities. There's slight encroachment now from new immigrants coming into different, you know, middle class, upper class areas. So they're not gated and protected, but it's the lower class, people that can't afford any sort of protections that are there. They're right on the front lines, and you know, our crime, our assaults, our sexual assaults are going through, our petty crime rates are going through, sexual assaults, as I've mentioned before. All of this is ramping up, but you're at the very other end. You're at the far end of the scale, where I think socialism, I think the ANC has morphed into something outrageous now, that's just openly calling for the genocide of white people in South Africa. And for people that are unaware, the South Africans have been there, I think it's 1652, was when the Boer first arrived in South Africa and bought the lands from the indigenous population and lived quite peacefully till the Zulu arrived. And then things started to change a little bit more about then. Am I correct?
Yeah, more or less. The first white settlers did arrive in 1652, as you correctly said, but it took 125 years before the whites met the first blacks, as you know, black people. I'm not talking now about the indigenous people. In what can rightly be described as a genocide or a near genocide. If you come to South Africa today, you will see the glorious Bushman artwork in the province of Natal up on the east coast, but there are no Bushmen there. They were all chased westwards towards Cape Town. And, the evidence of the fact that that was their homeland still exists. But the people are not there. So the broad-shouldered, dark-skinned blacks, as you know blacks to be, east coast of Africa, and they had not yet reached Cape Town. In fact, they were about 1,000 kilometers away from Cape Town. The first whites and the first blacks met on the east bank of the Great Fish River in 1777. So for 125 years, the whites were in a region where these people who are now claiming they want this land back simply had never occupied, and that's just a fact. And a few years later, in 75, the Xhosa chiefs agreed with the whites. They signed a treaty saying, look, across the Great Fish River. If you don't come this side, we won't come to your side because we never had that land. It didn't belong to us. You didn't steal anything. These are our historical territories. Those are your territories. We won't cross. They then broke the agreements about 9 times. But the point is that in writing, they agreed that the western 40% of the country had never belonged to them. And on top of that, you have places where land was bought by treaty, such as with the Zulus. And that's where the first real trouble came, where there were mass murders of the settlers and so on after they'd bought land from the Zulu king. And then it starts to get pretty muddy. But the real British defeated the Boers in the Anglo-Boer War of 1899 to 1902, because once they'd won that war and they'd colonized South Africa, taken the gold mines and the diamond mines, they then imposed a series of laws that became apartheid. Apartheid was never, ever, ever, ever invented by the, let's say, for want of a better word, the native white people of South Africa. That's just an absolute fallacy. The British devised the entire framework of what later became apartheid. And then things, became more complicated.
Yeah. It's great. I think it's important that people realize that the actual history of South Africa, and to hear it from you guys, people just presume that it was automatically that these expropriation of the lands without compensation are the right thing to do because it was their land beforehand, and it's a complete misdemeanor. People really aren't fully aware of the actual history, and thank you so very much for laying that out for us there. So just give everybody a clear example. Theresa May was also recently there. Can you speak a little bit about Theresa May's complicity as well? Oof.
That's a provocative question. I have to bite my tongue as I consider what words to use to answer you. She's a victim from hell. Chosen to meddle in something that she absolutely doesn't understand. The facts are vastly different to what she is complicit in this, in endorsing it. She is overlooking glaring facts. And it's just astonishing to us that after the history of South Africa, that a British Prime Minister would still consider meddling in this affair. You know, you would have thought that they might have learned, at least from the Zimbabwe thing, you know, between Tony Blair and Robert Mugabe. When she visited here, sorry, I'm choosing my words very carefully.
I can see that. Take your time, sir. Take your time. I appreciate that.
When she visited, she returned the ship's bell of the SS Mendi, which was a ship that was sunk with all hands while transporting particularly, but not only, native troops to the front lines of World War I. And as a cartoonist, you know, depicted a couple of days later, it would have meant a lot more if she'd returned the stolen Cullinan diamond. I know these things are in the past, you know, they're past history, and I think that if you try too hard to scratch back into history, it leads you down a rabbit hole. So I'm not saying that she should return anything. All that we are saying is it's funny how when people bring gifts, you know, like Greeks bearing gifts,
yes,
they bring the cheapest, nastiest things that they can, you know.
I think she meddled.
Now, I don't want to say too much more about Theresa May. It won't be a credit to me or my organization if I'm honest and truthful.
I appreciate that. I just bring it up because it was just a recent visit, and I pretty much gathered that it would have evoked such a strong emotion, you know, given the histories and stuff like that. But I do think that her attendance was by design and was set to inflame the situation very much so, you know. So
yes.
I want to talk about other things as well that I've been noticing as well, that even day to day, like using shopping, going to your local KFC or your local quick diner, the foods are being poisoned. People are reporting all sorts of manners being included in it, and they openly tell you to your face, you know, how was your dinner? What was in your food? They're poisoning their, you know, and some of the Twitter handles as well, Simon. The Twitter, it's blatant racism is just fantastic. It's just beyond belief.
Well, this thing of kitchen workers putting feces, semen, or vaginal fluid or menstrual fluid on hamburgers is a long running thing, and there's piles of evidence for it. It has been going on, you know, since forever. So, yeah, you have to think twice about.
I'm
a hamburger. Kind of examples which are pretty banal and which apply equally to liberals as to conservatives will help to get cataracts off people's eyes, because the mainstream whites in South Africa are still very prone to believing the accepted narrative of what is occurring. You know, you can go into not all, but into many white people's houses today and see a copy of Nelson Mandela's autobiography, A Long Walk to Freedom, displayed prominently, ever so prominently on the bookshelf next to the dining room table or in the lounge, the sitting room, because they want to, you know, prove that they're part of the new South African rainbow nation. But some of them are waking up to the endless barrage of lies that has been shoved down their throats for close to 40 years, you know. The reality is that the ANC is not a benevolent organization. The reality is that black people are not inherently more virtuous than white people. That Caucasians are not inherently more greatly predisposed to any kind of badness. And if people begin to think a little bit about the fact that the black kitchen workers serving them a hamburger or a sandwich might have put menstrual fluid on it, then maybe they will begin to realize on a very practical, banal level that it's not that we whites are all always bad and they blacks are all always benign.
I've seen numerous accounts from other black workers on farms and other black people that have no affiliation to Cyril Ramaphosa or Julius Malema, and you know, they openly say that this is wrong, you know, but they're not in the majority. They see that these crimes that are perpetrated are go against their basic humanity. They're good people. And these crimes affect both black and white people. You know, it's not just, I know the white farmers are being particularly attacked, but even those that work with the black farmer, or work with the white farmers, are being, and their families are under immense pressure to rat out and give details of, you know, people inside the house and their routines.
Yes, that's the thing. The blacks of South Africa and the whites of South Africa are, when all is said and done, human beings. Both parties are human beings. Whites are not intrinsically neo-Nazis, and blacks are not necessarily criminals. And we've heard many stories of black people in cash in transit. I'm sure you know about the cash in transit heists, where they blow up the vans carrying the money from the shops to the bank, you know, from the businesses to banks and so on, where those poor guys get tracked down and they'll be cornered by a bunch of guys who will say to them, look, we know who you are, we know where you live, we know where your children go to school. Unless you conspire with us to perpetrate a cash in transit heist of a vehicle in which you're working, transporting money, we're going to, you know, kill your children or whatever. And that goes on in farms, it goes on in houses, homes, whites in suburbia over recent years. And often home were complicit. And in many cases, they were only complicit because they were terrified into being complicit.
I just have to apologize to my listeners at the moment. But the internet connection is a little bit unstable, but the sound is coming straight through. So we're going to press on anyway, because the message is far too important, and we can hear exactly what you're saying, Simon. So just to let people know that the internet connection is a little bit ropey and stuff like that. So, but going forward now, Simon, what do you envisage happening, or how do you think the President Trump's administration can get involved? I know they said they were looking at it. Do you think there's any sort of practical things that they might be able to do to be able to assist in the situation over there?
Well, Rowan, I think that in the end, international parties will become involved in this crisis. Once it reaches such a head, if you like, that they have to, that they can't be seen to be ignoring it. But I think that it's going to take some time. South Africa remains in the minds of most decision makers of the world. And by decision makers, I include citizens and civilians, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, in Western Europe and North America, a paragon of virtue. New South African rainbow nation can more or less do no wrong in most people's eyes. So it would be almost impossible for President Trump to meddle in things here in South Africa, because the opprobrium, the indignation, the opposition, the resistance worldwide would be too great. However, he has shown a great deal of courage in the tweet that he tweeted a few weeks ago, reporting that he directed the U.S. Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, to scrutinize or to look closely at what is going on in South Africa. You know, it's worth mentioning to you and to others that South Africa remains, to this day, the single country on earth with the greatest mineral resources. And there is almost no second place. You know, it's like a horse race when the horse wins by a furlong. You don't speak about the second place horse, really. And therefore, from a geopolitical point of view, from a global monopoly game point of view, South Africa is of tremendous strategic value to any of the poles of power, whether it be to China or to the West or to others. So it's almost certain that there will be international parties involved in our crisis if things reach a head, and we think that they will. We believe that there are many signs that are pretty compelling as far as a civil war is concerned. We don't think that there's any way back now. The government cannot manage the crisis on its hands on its hands. It gets worse every day, whether it be unemployment, the decline in the rand, the massive escalation in the price, the conflict over the land, the burning down of the farms, the rape and murder occurring on the farms. It's getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. We believe that sooner or later, somebody is going to do something drastic. And that is going to be the fuse that ignites the barrel of gunpowder. I'm not sure what else to say. I don't want to stick my neck out too far, but we're pretty firmly convinced that there's no looking back now.
Yeah, I get that sense myself, and coming from being over here in Europe, you would aspire, or you would hope that there might be some reconciliation, or there might be some sort of compromise reached between both sides of the parties. But I just don't see the ANC. I just listening to Julius Malema's rhetoric and the kind of language that comes out. It's he's even bypassing the government. I seen a government meeting where he flagrantly just disregarded. We don't have to adhere to anything that you say. We will take the lands back. We will do what we don't need you to do what we want to do. It's like he's becoming a force on his own, and it's going to spiral out of control. And I don't want to talk too much about tactics or plans or what you plan to do, but Sudalands, you guys are about 800,000 strong, and then I think there's the expatriates, British, are 1.2 million. Two separate sort of identities. How are they going to protect themselves? You guys are pretty much, training and doing what you need to do to protect your interests, but the other day-to-day citizens are pretty much left to their own devices. Am I right in that presumption?
Yeah, well, you're wrong, but it's your fault. This is an error that has crept into the narrative over time. What we've always said is that we have a certain number of members. We think more or less. We're not sure what our membership is, quite simply because we don't oblige people to register, for the simple reason that people are afraid of losing their jobs and being ostracized if they are revealed to be members of Zuidlanders. We believe that we have about 130,000 members, but a leaked state security agency report reveals that the government intelligence services believe that our membership is 169,000. We have, though, that we believe that about 800,000 people will participate in our national emergency plan if anarchy breaks out across South Africa. That is our computer modeling of how many people we should be thinking of taking care of. It's about 800,000 to 1.2 million, but we work on the number 800,000. And that over time is, people have kind of construed that to be our membership, but it's not really the case. Our goal is to get people out of the cities, people of our identifiable ethnic group, given that in any civil war scenario, particularly those being promoted by Julius Malema, Jacob Zuma, the government, the Minister of Defense, very notably on the 3rd of November last year, and by Black First, Land First, Andile Mngxitama, that or the object of people's dissatisfaction, because the rhetoric has been built up to such a point where people believe that if the enemy is the white man, areas where the demographics are favorable, in some of the hinterland of South Africa, there would be a demographic advantage for white people, or less of a disadvantage. Those people, to answer your question more directly now, those people who are not prepared happen, or who even buy into the government, we believe will suffer. We believe that they will be on the receiving end of what the government has built up to be a massive desire for vengeance. let me put it to you this way. On the 8th of January 2015, I believe. Anyway, January a few years ago, our then president, Jacob Zuma, said that the cause of all of the troubles in South Africa was the arrival of whites in South Africa on the 6th of April, 1652. And as one black man said to me, a very important, very influential black man said to me, in the minds of the people, that means if we get rid of whites, we will have no more trouble. So I think that kind of long-winded answer might give you a sense of perspective on your question.
So, I mean, yeah, just I'm noting just as we're recording, we're getting a couple of blocks. We got the general gist, and I got everything that you said there, but the connection is blocky. So what I might do is I might ask you to come back again. I know we'll have regular contacts. You're definitely welcome to come on this show anytime. So I will reschedule another appointment where we'll have a better internet connection. But I will be putting this out because I think any opportunity that you guys get a chance to broadcast your message and tell the world, you know, that this can be avoided. You know, we're still, even though it's getting ramped up, it still can be avoided if people are willing to come to the table and try and, you know, reach a common ground and reach some sort of compromise. I don't know if that's me being a little bit naive. I believe what you said there, that those that aren't preparing will probably suffer the worst. You know, those that aren't prepared for the worst are inevitably going to suffer the most. And that's a kind of a warning that we should get out to as many people as we should. And it's interesting that you say that people are in fear of their jobs. I mean, you're at that stage now where there's armed conflict. I'm at this stage here now where people are so controlled by political correctness that they're afraid to speak out for fear of losing their income. But if we don't speak now, while things are peaceful, you know, could you speak to that? I mean, could you ask people, more shame on you if you don't speak out. If you remain quiet, they won't come for you, but next they will come for you. You know, can you give us some sort of perspective on that kind of emotion?
Yeah, well, that's a very good point. And, you know, it was witnessed in Nazi Germany. I don't recall the quotation exactly, but I read it in a book called Inside Europe by John Gunther, I believe. I think that's where I read it. You know, people didn't speak out when they came for the Jews because they weren't Jewish. And then they didn't speak out when they came for the Romanis, the Gypsies, because they weren't. And so it goes on and on and on and on and on until eventually there's nobody left to speak out. And what has happened of brainwashing by the globalist media, particularly, by global capital, secondly, by the local liberal elite and academic elites, that white people in South Africa believe that they are inherently wrong. You know, they believe that they are guilty of crimes that they just didn't commit. That if there's any crime, it must have been a white person who somehow laid behind it. And so we have a scenario here where people, perpetrators of crimes, will say, well, I did it because my mother was subjected to abuse as a kitchen maid, or my father was a gardener and he had no opportunities in life, therefore I as a black man am entitled to slit the throats of a young girl and her brother, you know, this kind of thing. So if people don't stand up and do what you're doing, Rowan, whether it be in Ireland or in other places in Western Europe or in North America, the reality is that the globalist conspiracy, and by now we have to believe that this thing is not all accidental. You know, we don't have to go off the deep end. We don't have to become David Icke apostles to see that this coordinated assault on Western European civilization didn't happen from within, and it wasn't spontaneous. It was encouraged, it was provoked, it was stoked over a long period of time. And if you don't stand up, if people don't find the courage that you have to do this kind of stuff, unfashionable stuff that you are doing, speaking about this kind of thing, you will find that they will steamroller you in a very short span of time. I don't think that any white South African believed in, let's say, 1992, 93, or 94, that our society would be so comprehensively destroyed, and that we would be vilified for it in such a short span of time.
Unbelievable stuff, Simon. Thank you very much for doing it. I'm going to kind of wrap it up now. Just for this first one, we're going to keep it nice and short. Can you just give us a few directions how people can support the Suderland and the website or anything like that you might be able to promote and keep an eye on you?
Yes, thank you very much, Robin. If people would like to support us, the work that we're doing, very hard work, we'd be grateful. We have a website called suidlanders.org. That's SUIDLANDERS, suidlanders.org. Very easy. And in the bottom right-hand corner, there is a PayPal link. We appreciate any contributions.
Yeah, I will. I'll have links to that in the description box. Also, I'll have it brought up on the screen then when we're talking. So with that, Simon Roche, thank you very much for joining the Grand Torino and giving us a quick insight into South Africa. I look forward to further conversations, and I wish you and your family all the best and stay safe, my friend. And we will do this again pretty soon.
Thank you very much, Robin. Thank
Us, everybody. Take care.
you. It's much appreciated.